Welcome back to the deep dive. So, if you're learning a new skill or trying to bring some kind of intuitive practice into your life, exploring a field that doesn't have a perfect textbook answer for everything, you know the feeling. It's that
Ah,
quiet internal whisper of doubt, the little skeptic on your shoulder asking, "Is this really working?"
or are you just making all this up?
Exactly. And that feeling is just universal. It's the friction point where your own curiosity crashes into all this conditioning. And it can totally stop you in your tracks. So, our listeners shared this really fascinating collection of excerpts from a resource called The Alchemist's Assurance. It's a text focused specifically on this problem, how to build up self belief and trust your own process, especially when you don't have that hard external proof. Our mission today is pretty simple. We're going to dive into this material and pull out the actionable insights. How do we actually work with that doubt and, move forward with purpose? How do we turn that self-questioning from a roadblock into, I don't know, a navigational tool?
It's such a critical subject.
Yeah.
I think often when people start a new practice, they expect confidence to just show up first, to sort of enable the work.
Right, like it's a prerequisite.
Exactly. But
Hmm.
these sources suggest that confidence is actually the result of doing the work, not the prerequisite. We need to shift our whole perspective from seeing doubt as a sign of failure to seeing it as, well, just an inevitable part of the journey. Learning how to manage it, not eliminate it, is crucial for anyone trying to really internalize new knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack that then. If doubt isn't a personal flaw, if it's not some failure of my intuition, where does this powerful, persistent skepticism actually come from? Because it feels so deeply ingrained when it shows up.
That's because it is ingrained. But the key is that it's not inherent. The alchemist's assurance really stresses that skepticism is a natural but entirely learned response. We are, in a sense, trained out of our natural trust over time.
Train out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just look at the common sources the text points to, and you see all these external influences. First and foremost is just cultural conditioning. We live in a world that really prioritizes strict empirical logic, material, quantifiable proof.
Right. If you can't measure it, it's not real.
If you can't put it in a spreadsheet, it's often just dismissed as subjective or, imaginary.
Yeah, that makes sense. If your framework for success is purely material, like, did I make $1 million,
Yeah.
then anything based on, say, emotional clarity or a subtle shift inside you is just going to be invalidated right away.
Precisely. And then secondly, you have social pressures. This can include religious or social stigma that might dismiss or even actively mock non-traditional practices. I mean, think about how hard it is to share a really meaningful personal experience without immediately sort of bracing for ridicule.
Mm.
And then internally, skepticism is also fueled by just a simple fear of being wrong or that paralyzing perfectionism. If you think there's only one perfect way to do something, any tiny deviation just fuels massive self-doubt.
And the modern one, the comparison to everyone else.
Oh, that's maybe the most insidious factor today. The constant comparison to other people's curated, flawless online presentations. This idea that everyone else is a master and you're just fumbling around in the dark.
The comparison trap is just deadly. But I think the real relief here, what you're saying, is that if doubt is learned, it means we can unlearn it, or at least manage it. We don't have to overhaul our entire personality. We just have to start recognizing a habit.
That's the reframe. Doubt as a habit to be managed, not a defect to be fixed. That's the whole foundation of the text's advice. Once you see the roots, you can stop letting the feeling paralyze you and start engaging with it.
Okay, so that leads us to what feels like the trickiest part. If we're supposed to engage with doubt, how do we tell the difference between genuine, wise caution, which is healthy, right? And that corrosive skepticism that just stops us from doing anything?
It's a fine line.
It is. It's so hard to tell if you're listening to a legitimate internal warning or just giving in to fear.
This is where we had to get really clear and separate skepticism from healthy discernment. Discernment is your critical thinking working with your practice. It helps you question sources, check your intentions, refine a method that isn't working. It's proactive, it's protective.
Yeah.
It asks, is this safe? Is this information reliable?
Okay, so discernment is about improving the process.
Yes.
Oh.
Whereas unchecked skepticism is reactive and corrosive. It undermines your confidence with questions like, why even bother? This isn't going to work anyway. It tries to invalidate the experience before it even happens.
So discernment is focused on refining the how, but skepticism is just dismissing the what.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, but here's where I think the learner gets tripped up. You mentioned we shouldn't dismiss our own experiences just because they can't be measured in a conventional way.
Right.
But how do we avoid just falling into confirmation bias? Just seeing what we want to see.
That is a fundamentally important question. And the source addresses it by talking about a shift in expectation. If you're expecting some huge, dramatic, measurable event, you're almost certainly going to be disappointed and
Yeah.
feel invalidated.
You're waiting for the fireworks.
You're waiting for the fireworks, exactly. The key insight here is that a confident practitioner learns to trust the subtlety of their own internal data. They aren't waiting for a spectacle. The book reminds us that magic, or any deep psychological work for that matter, often operates through tiny incremental shifts. The measure of success isn't volume or visibility, it's consistency and alignment.
So if subtlety is the metric, that changes everything. But then, what exactly is valid lived experience that we can trust? What kind of subtle evidence should we be looking for?
The sources give some very concrete, very grounded examples. It doesn't need to be cinematic. It should be integrated. For instance, just noticing that feeling of deep, prolonged calm that settles in after a specific ritual or even just a grounding exercise. That emotional shift, that's data.
That's data. I like that.
Another one is an increase in synchronicities. Those meaningful coincidences that just feel like they defy random chance.
Oh, give me an example.
A good quick one would be, say you're sitting with a really complex problem, just agonizing over it, and then completely by chance, the next chapter in the book you happen to be reading gives you the exact framing you needed. It feels like a little nod from the universe.
A validation that you're on the right track.
Exactly. Or, other data points can be things like an emotional release, a sudden clarity on a problem. The crucial thing is to track the gradual change over time, recognizing that real transformation is usually an evolution, not an explosion.
Okay, that moves us perfectly into the big actionable tool here, which is the journal, or what the text calls the Book of Shadows. It seems vital for tracking this subtle evidence. How does it actually work as a defense against skepticism?
Well, the journal transforms that subjective experience into observable patterns. It's not just a diary of feelings, it's more like an experimental log. You track the conditions, the intention, the action you took, and then the outcome, even the subtle
You're
ones.
creating a study of yourself.
You're creating a longitudinal study of your own practice. And this tangible record becomes your best defense against future doubt. When that little skeptic voice whispers, that didn't really work, you can physically open the book and look at the data.
Right.
You can say, wait a minute, on 3 previous occasions when I felt this specific anxiety, this exact exercise led to clarity within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It provides your own objective evidence. It allows you to say, this has worked for me in this way before.
It essentially makes your intuitive hits repeatable. It turns them from what feels like random chance into a reliable personal methodology. It shifts the burden of proof from some universal standard to a personal one.
Exactly. And that self-generated evidence is what directly counters that other huge confidence blocker, the constant need for external validation. We are so trained to seek approval, to confirm that we're doing it right.
That's a huge challenge. You look at what other people are doing, especially online, and think, my way is messy, so it must be wrong. How do we break that cycle and lean into what the source calls alignment?
The sources really emphasize that your path is intensely personal. Confidence grows when you stop using comparison as your metric and you adopt alignment instead. You stop asking, am I doing this ritual exactly like that expert on Instagram? And you start asking, when I do this, does it feel congruent? Do I feel more centered, more clear, more true to myself?
That's a much better question.
It is. Your intuitive practice, it doesn't need external permission to exist or to be effective for you. The moment you define success by internal congruence, not external consensus, that need for validation it starts to dissipate.
That brings us to building the muscle then. Confidence isn't a state you just wait for, it's built through doing. So what are some of the small, sustainable actions for strengthening this muscle of self-trust?
The goal here is just making the process routine, moving it out of the realm of the special occasion and into the realm of habit. The sources stress starting incredibly small.
How small?
I mean, it could be dedicating 5 minutes every morning to a clear, singular intention for the day. It could be simple energy work, like a moment of deep breathing and grounding, or just consistent quiet work with a simple object like a candle or an herb.
Okay.
The psychological benefit of this regularity is just profound. By doing something related to your practice daily, you normalize it. Familiarity grows, and the practice loses its mysterious, intimidating quality. When you're deeply familiar with the motions, shuffling a tarot deck or doing a specific meditation, the process becomes intuitive. And that internal critic has way less room to jump in and question the fundamentals.
So we're building a foundation of just operational confidence. You trust the tool because you use it every day. But what about when we run up against skepticism from other people? What does the alchemist's assurance say about protecting that new, fragile confidence from dismissal?
External skepticism can be just as damaging as internal doubt, sometimes more so. The text really treats your personal craft as something sacred that requires boundaries, protection.
So, what does that look like in practice?
The first step is triage. You do not owe everyone access to your inner life or your learning process.
Hmm.
A key strategy is just keeping parts of your practice private. If you have a specific intention or a deeply personal ritual, it probably doesn't need an audience or an explanation.
That feels powerful. There's so much pressure to share everything, to be totally transparent, but sometimes that's the enemy of development, isn't it?
It absolutely can be. Furthermore, the text strongly advises against getting into arguments with people who are determined to belittle your beliefs. That conversation is rarely about education. It's usually just about them draining your energy to confirm their own biases.
Don't feed the trolls.
Basically, use that energy for your practice instead. And this also extends to your digital life. Curate your environment. If following certain accounts makes you feel inadequate or doubtful, just remove those influences. Prioritize supportive, grounded voices. Silence, in this context, becomes a really powerful form of self-respect.
Okay, I think we've covered the whole confidence building framework, but the final section of the sources offers this really sophisticated pivot, moving away from just managing doubt to actively using it, treating it as a teacher. So when that voice shows up, what specifically should we be asking it?
We use curiosity, not fear, to disarm it. Instead of letting doubt spiral into just this generalized anxiety, we ask it specific investigative questions. The source suggests starting with the emotional core. What specifically am I afraid of here? Am I afraid of failure, of being judged, of wasting my time?
Getting to the root of the fear.
Exactly. And once you identify the fear, you can separate the messenger from the message by asking, do I doubt the practice itself, or do I just doubt myself?
Huh.
Very often, I think skepticism about the practice is just a projection of a deeper lack of self-trust.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. And finally, the most practical question. Given this feeling of doubt, what would help me feel more grounded right now? This shifts the focus from paralysis to a concrete, actionable need.
That's incredible because it reframes this big, overwhelming feeling of doubt into a solvable problem. If the answer is, I doubt myself, maybe I need to review my journal. If it's, I feel ungrounded, maybe I just need to stop thinking and go outside for 15 minutes.
That is the synthesis. Doubt stops being a failure condition and becomes a diagnostic tool. If you're feeling skeptical, it's usually pointing directly to an area where you need reassurance or rest or maybe just a little deeper knowledge. When you use it as a signpost, you neutralize its power to derail you.
So, what does this all mean for you, the learner? Navigating your own path. The main takeaway from the alchemist's assurance seems to be that confidence is not some giant switch you flip. It's built slowly, through these small, consistent acts of self-trust and self-compassion. And if you feel doubt, it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It just means you're actively learning.
And remember, the purpose of this work is not to prove anything to anyone else, not even to the world at large. The relationship you are building is ultimately with yourself, with natural rhythms, with energy, and with your own intuitive intelligence. When you honor that relationship and consistently show up for your practice despite all the noise, well, confidence is the unavoidable result.
Trust the path, and more importantly, trust the process of building your own map.
And here's the powerful concluding thought from the sources for you to sit with. Your magic is real because you are real. Trust the path unfolding beneath